Hello and welcome to My Own Worst Enemy, where we're about to start another playthrough. This time it's going to be Imperium, Empires in Conflict. This is from the Game Designer's Workshop. I did do an unboxing of this a while back. I should probably post a link to that down below. If not, you can find it on the channel here. This game is copyright 1977. And if you note next to that, it says by the Conflict Game Company. Now, I don't know who Conflict Game Company is. I tried to find some information on the internet about them and couldn't find anything. So if you know anything about the Conflict Game Company and what they published and who they are and what happened to them, I would love to know. Leave some comments down below. I'd really be interested to find out what happened to the Conflict Game Company. But this is Imperium. This was released in 1977. This was released the same year that the classic Traveler role-playing game was released. So the little 3 black books came out same year this came out. They are not really connected in any way other than the terminology and the way some of the mechanics work and maybe some of the historical information in that universe or as that would develop later, I don't know. But the intent here though is to just give a quick overview of the game, how it's set up, what we're looking at, what the objectives are. And before we do that though, just a brief what's going on here, what the setup of this game is. Basically, you have the Terran Confederation, which is represented this part of the map, these blue counters, these green counters. This represents the Terran Confederation, an upstart empire of their own, if you will, and they're reaching out into space, but they bump up against this thing called the Imperium. So you have this huge empire of which we're only looking at one sector, I guess you would call it. There's a governor of this sector who is up in Gashida. He is in control of this sector, so he's run into these upstart Terrans, and his goal is to try to, I guess, neutralize them, make them not a threat, and gain the attention of the Emperor, and maybe make a name for himself. And so to that effect, the game has something called a glory index. So glory is what this local governor is trying to earn. He wants to impress the emperor if he can. There's this marker on this track called glory. So what the Imperial player is looking to do is if he can increase his glory to 10 or greater, he will win the game. The the Terrans want to stop that. So what they want to do is they want to get that glory marker down to 0, and then they will win the game. Now, an interesting thing to note about this glory system is after turn number 3, and I've got 2 cubes over here to mark this. What happens after turn 3 is you move this minimum glory marker up 1, the maximum glory marker will come down 1. So now the governor is trying to get the glory after turn 3, turn 4, he's trying to get his glory up to 9, and the Terrans are trying to get that down to 1. Then each turn after turn 3, you will decrease and increase these markers. So they're kind of compressing in on each other, and that will cause the game to end actually fairly quickly. So you probably can get, I want to say about 8 turns, because again, turn 3 is when you start compressing the ends of that glory. So that's victory. And now let's just take a quick look at the map itself. It's not a big map. It's not a full-size map that we're used to. Over here we have the turn record chart. I put an arrow. This is one of my own little counters I put out. This is where we will mark the turns as we progress. Also, while we go on this chart is production. There is a whole economy we'll talk about that is driven by resource units, and we will spend those to produce, and as we produce those things, they will come out. Resource units. There's a single digits and tens digits so that we can track up to almost 100 resources if we ever get that high. I don't think we will though. So the first thing that stands this game, it's a little different. When you travel through hyperspace, and I should point out that these years, every 1 turn is 2 years. In the game, when you move along a hyperspace route though, you can go as far as you want to, unless you hit an enemy unit, then you've got to come to a stop. You don't have to follow the jump routes. You can actually choose to travel outside of those jump routes. However, if you choose to do that, you're going to be limited to moving 1 hex per movement factor, 1 turn basically. So it's going to take you forever. If you want to move from this sector to this sector, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's going to take a long time. You're not going to want to move units that way if you can help it. And so what's on the board, other than those jump routes, you have stellar hexes, they call these. These are basically any hex that's going to have a planet in it. The small red dots are worlds. There's some yellow dots that are worlds. And these larger, there's some special hexes, these larger hexes. I'm not really sure what a Procyon is and why that one's yellow. I could not figure that out. Now, I will say that this rule book, not a big rule book. It's only 12 pages, 11 of those are rules. It is a product of its time. So it's a very, information is scattered throughout it. It could have used a lot more work, in my opinion, than what we're seeing. And I'll point out some of that as we go along. So couldn't find out really what that yellow Procyon star means. But these white ones, these are 3-star systems, and they are white because if you jump into this system, you can't get out unless you have a tanker unit. So there's a tanker unit for the Imperium up here. If there's a tanker in there, no problem. You can move in and out. But so that's kind of an oddity here. And actually, speaking of oddities, there are some oddities on this map that I also don't understand. The rulebook didn't really go into any great detail. One of them is why this Altair system, which is one of the ones that require the transport, or I'm sorry, the fueler to be there. It's just kind of stuck off to the side here. Strategically, I don't know why that would even be important, why you can't just skip it. There are 2 systems that aren't even connected via jump routes. So there's one down here and one up here. So again, it would take forever to move to those systems if you don't have a jump route. So I'm not really sure why those 2 systems. If you have a square, this is going to be your planetary surface boxes. So the red systems, the ones that are marked in red, these are called secondary systems. So they're basically worlds that are not inhabited. They're just empty worlds. The white boxes, these are habitable worlds. And some of these start off actually with the player units on them. Some of them, like the ones you see here, there's no one there. So they're habitable worlds, but they are currently not inhabited by either side. And what else? So, for those of you that are super curious, the galactic center is that away. And there's a scale over here that shows that 2 hexes, that's 1 parsec, or 2 parsecs. So basically it is 2 hexes for each parsec. So let's zoom in here and take a look at some of these units a little closer up. All right, so we'll start up here with the Terran's homeworld Sol. So there's, I'm just going to slide these back. So there you can see the yellow marker, and there's a white planetary surface box that represents Sol. This green counter, this is you probably can't see that, so let me see if I can hold that up a little bit better. This is an infantry unit that was on the surface box of Sol there. I had also placed a planetary defense counter there as well. So those are what you're seeing on that planetary surface box. There's also a green marker for the Terrans. This is a homeworld marker. So that also goes into the planetary box. If I can put these in correctly. And then there's some ships in here. So I put, looks like 2 destroyers and a light cruiser. And let's see if you can see those. I'll just grab a light cruiser and a destroyer so we can take a look at those together. So there you see the upper right is the ship type. Those numbers on the bottom, so the first number is the beam factor, the second number is the missile factor, the third number is screens or shields as they're called, and the rulebook does mix the terminology, which is another oddity, but it does, so be aware of that. And I'm going to put these ships back into the Sol hex, showing that they're not in the planetary box, but they're actually in that system. And then if you're looking, you'll notice there's a blue counter here that looks just like that green one I showed you that was a world counter. This is an outpost. And so the outposts can be built in these uninhabitable star systems. So I've got one there for the Terrans, and that's what you're seeing. There's some other systems. So the Terrans start off with Sol, Alpha Centauri A and Alpha Centauri B as their inhabited worlds. So those are home worlds for the Terran. The Imperium will start off with 6 home worlds. And I'm going to grab one over here that's off the map. So this is a black marker, black and red marker for an Imperial homeworld. And like I said, they will get 6 of those. They also get outposts, and that's these red with the white. So that's an outpost for the Imperials. And of course, they have ships and ground troops, just like the Terrans do. So let's zoom back out. So the Imperials do have 6 homeworlds out there. Hard to see because I've got some ground units covering them up. There's I know there's 3 across here. There's 1, 2, 3, and then there's some more kind of scattered this way. I don't think this is a world. I think this is an outpost. It is. So now I'm just going to kind of quickly go through the rule book and explain some other things that are going on here. So the first thing we start off with is this sequence of play. And this is when I was talking about how, this rule book is a product of its time and it's not that great and information is scattered. So the sequence of play starts off with the Terran player turn, with the first thing being the maintenance and the production phase. But then what does the rule book do? It starts talking about movement. And you don't hit the production information, the economic information, until you get to the back of the book. It's kind of an odd layout, in my opinion. But let's start with the way they have it in movement. We've already talked a little bit about movement. So what they call sublight movement is just what I was talking about. When you're not following along a jump route, then you can travel hex to hex, but that is going to take you forever because it's very slow movement. Now, there are some units that actually can't use the jump routes, and that's maybe why they included this sublight movement rule in here. And we'll talk about those when we get to when I actually go through the units in the rule book. We'll talk about which of those units actually can't use the jump routes. Then, of course, the next movement is the hyperspace jump. So we've talked about that, where you're moving along these jump lanes as far as you want to, as long as you don't run into an enemy force that would immediately cause you to stop. So refueling, we've talked about refueling. It's not an issue. The only time it becomes an issue is, like I said, if you jump into or try to jump through Sirius here or Altair up here, you're going to have a fuel tanker to be able to get back out. Now, the fuel tankers, they can move in and out. There's no issue for them. So, and at the start of the game, the Imperium has 1 tanker up here. The Terrans have no tanker. And then the rulebook talks about transportation. So you can have capital ships can carry troop counters, and there are transports that can carry those as well. There's something called a mothership, which really is, in my mind, a carrier. A really interesting thing going on with combat. When we have it, basically what you'll do is you'll pull your units off involved in combat. You'll line them up, and they'll each get to take a shot. But there's some other things going on there, like distance. You'll start at long range. You can close to short range. Whether you're using beams or missiles comes into play at what range you're at. And you can even try to control the range you want to fight at. So there's some interesting concepts in the space combat and the ground combat too, really. But basically, you'll line up and you'll fire at each other, and combat will continue until one side is destroyed or one side disengages. And there's some other things you can do. You can have suicide attacks in combat. You could fire all of your missiles at once to try to inflict just a killing blow. And if you do that, of course, you won't get to fire any more missiles if combat continues because you've used them all. And that is about it as far as starship combat goes. Then to go to planetary surface space interactions, you can bomb the planet surfaces, which again were these squares that we talked about. There are defenses that you can have. You can have the planetary defenses. You can have troops on the ground. In theory, you could have a ship on the ground. Like a transport has to land to unload its troops. So there's some interesting things going on there with those planetary surfaces. And then there's surface combat, which also works sort of like space combat. There are some differences, and we'll get into those if and when we see surface combat. Not that easy to take a world in this game as far as I can tell. It doesn't seem to be anyway. Defensive fire, terminating combat, surface combat is the same. And of course, then you can have reaction movement. So if you have a space combat take place, or not combat, but if you have a fleet move, you can actually react to that movement. You can move 3 jumps to try to intervene in your enemy's movement. So that's something we'll have to remember. Then it goes into starships. So starships is where we talk about the different types of ships that we have in the game. So the first is a transport. And like I said, these are the ones that can carry 1 counter of cargo. They can also, I think they can also transport outposts and planetary defense markers. So that's a way of moving around your outposts. And when the Terrans start, they have 3 outposts that are constructed, but they're not placed anywhere. So that's how we're going to have to get those moved out. We've talked about tankers. That's what's going to allow you to refuel at these locations that are that mess up your refueling attempts. There are scouts, destroyers, light cruisers, strike cruisers. So basically, those are just different levels of ships. The Terrans tend to focus on beam combat, where the Imperials tend to focus on missile combat. And then we get into what they call the capital ships. So these are the ones that they say are good for attacking worlds. There's dreadnoughts, improved dreadnoughts, battleships, and monitors. Monitors are basically huge weapons platforms that cannot move. There's an example of one over here. This is the Terran monitor, which I have stuck at Bernard's star here. And then there's missile boats, there's fighters, and those motherships, or as I call them, carriers, because that's basically what they do. And then there's troops. So there's two types of troops. You have the regular troops, which I showed you. Then there's something called jump troops, which are a little bit different. They're the elite forces for both sides. One of their special functions is they don't have to be transported down to a planet's surface. They can actually be deployed to the planet's surface from orbit, from the planetary system. Then the rulebook talks about economics, and we mentioned that briefly. Basically, your resource units are what's driving your economy. You will earn resource units every turn. That's different between the Imperium and the Terrans. The Imperium, they're going to get a budget starting at 10 RUs, and they call it resource unit RUs. They're going to get 10 RUs per turn, and then they're going to get RUs for having connected worlds and outposts that can get tribute back. The Terrans are strictly based on connected worlds and outposts, so that's how they're going to get their income. And so for the Terrans, they're going to want to maintain connectivity between their outposts and their worlds, because you have to be able to draw a line back to Sol that you can trace all the way back without anything blocking it to get the income. The Imperium doesn't have to worry about that. They just need to have their outpost connect back to a world that they own. Then we get into maintenance. So you have all these ships, and you're going to have to pay maintenance on them. So let me grab one of these counters. Let's just grab this top. Looks like it's a scout. So in the upper left-hand corner, there's a 1. So that's the maintenance cost for that unit. Those will vary. So the scouts are 1. This monitor, you can see there's a 3. The destroyer has a 2. Larger the ship, usually the more maintenance you're going to pay on that. Now, maintenance is interesting in that you have something called frontier maintenance, and you have civilized maintenance, they call it, or I call it world maintenance. If you have ships that are in orbit around one of your home worlds, you're going to have to pay this maintenance cost that we talked about. So you pay that, and your ship is okay. It's not disrupted. So if you don't pay it, and a ship becomes what they call disrupted, and when you have a ship disrupted, then bad things happen. It's harder for a ship to jump. You've got to make a check to see if you can jump. So you don't want your ships being disrupted. Frontier maintenance is anything that's outside your home world. So anything that's in an empty hex, or if it's around an outpost, even though it's friendly, it's still considered being in the frontier. And what it's got to do, it's going to have to roll a d6, and it's going to have to try to roll higher than that number. So, and again, if you don't make that roll, then your ship's going to become disrupted. And again, if it's disrupted, you'll have to make a check to see if you can even jump through the hyperspace lanes. It'll also subtract 1 from your attack die roll in combat and nasty things like that. How do you recover from that disruption? Well, you're going to have to roll another die to see if you can recover if you're in the frontier. If you're at a home world, you can simply pay that maintenance factor plus 1 extra RU, and then it becomes recovered from disruption. So how do we build things? Well, you're going to have resource units at the beginning of each turn, and then each unit you want to build has a cost. So that on this player's aid card, you can see what it would cost to build a particular unit. So a destroyer would cost 3, a battleship would cost 20. So you have to plan in advance how much money you want to build these things, and also remember you are maintaining them, so budget is going to be an issue. There is a little bit of bookkeeping in this. It's not terrible bookkeeping, but there is a little bit of bookkeeping. So that's pretty much the same economics-wise. It's pretty much the same for the Imperium and the Terrans up to what we've talked about so far. But now the Imperium have a little extra thing thrown in here, because remember, they're just a province of a larger empire. So this governor is dealing with an emperor that's sitting somewhere. And so every turn, you're going to have this imperial intervention thing take place. So whatever's going on out in the empire is going to have an effect on your province. So you're going to roll to see what's happened. You could even have a civil war break out. You could have the emperor come to you and say, you know what, we're fighting this civil war and we need some of your ships, or we need more money from you, or whatever. So we may see that happen as well. So there's some outside influence affecting what's going on with the local province of the Imperials here. There's also something else that the provincial governor can do. He can actually request assistance from the emperor. So there's this appeals table. He can spend glory and he can try to get the emperor to intervene somehow, to give him maybe more RUs, maybe give him more ships. Also, the Imperials can't build certain ships. They can't build some of the certain capital ships until the Emperor says it's okay to do so, because the Emperor doesn't want anybody just building these huge ships. Maybe it threatens his power. They don't really say. I would guess that's probably the case. But the emperor can grant permission to the governor that, okay, yeah, it's okay. You can build a battleship now. That's perfectly okay. So that's kind of an interesting mechanic in this game as well. So like, there are some really interesting ideas in this game. So I look forward to trying it out and seeing how those things play out. One other thing to mention, the way this game works, you fight your first war, and if you're playing a campaign game, that war will come to an end. You'll go through a period of peace, and the rule book has a whole, let's see if I can find it, has a whole section about war and peacetime. So you'll roll to see how long peace lasts. And then there's some things that'll happen in the non-war period on the map that'll change slightly some of the things that have happened post-war. So the campaign is basically you'll fight a series of wars with peace in between those wars, and with the goal of the campaign being to eliminate your opponent. So that's pretty much the deal. The interesting thing about that, I think, is so you can play, let's say we play this first war, it ends. You can pause it there, pick it up, and come back later and continue the war whenever you please. Just make notes of where everything's at and what your status is, and pick the board up, pack it away, and then when you're ready to continue the next war, pull it back out and play. And I don't know if I'm going to play an entire campaign. I definitely want to get through at least one war to show you how this works and how it plays, and maybe we'll get an idea of what we think about the game overall after we're done playing it. So the final thing I want to talk about is game setup. That is back of the book. It tells you what Terran forces you get and where some of those go at start. Same thing for the Imperials. They have some worlds and outposts where they tell you to mark those. But beyond that, you're on your own. So what I did this for the Terrans especially, did it for the Imperiums also a little bit. And this may be a little bit gamey. I don't know if I'm reading too much into the game rules or not, but I put all of the ships that cost one maintenance, I put all those in outpost. And I did it because if you will remember, that's going to be considered frontier maintenance. So what that means is for this scout to not become disrupted, he's got to roll a 1 or higher on a d6 to avoid being disrupted. So anything with a 1 maintenance cost is not going to become disrupted if it's out in the frontiers, they call it, because it's got to roll 1 or higher, and you can do that on a d6 really easy. So I've got units spread out based on, I put as many of those 1 units, I think I put them all in outpost areas. Now I did leave some ships around homeworld, some of the larger ships. There's a light cruiser, 2 destroyers here around Seoul that I will have to pay maintenance on, but I don't want those disrupted. That's why I have those there. I want to keep those active. So hopefully it'll give me a little bit extra income to play with. I did the same thing for the Imperium. I put some of their ships, like for instance, let's see, not the tanker's what I'm looking for. So the tanker, he's out in an outpost. There's some of these other size 1 units are out in the outpost as well. And the other reason to put them in the outpost or wherever is remember that when you jump, you're not limited how far you can go unless you're reacting to movement. You can move these units in place wherever you want to. So they start off here. That one starts off there. They can both end up where you want them to end up pretty easily. Now, as far as strategy goes, looking at the board, what immediately came to my mind for the Terrans, I see 2 choke points, if you will, and this is probably from my years of playing these computer games, Stellaris and Master of Orion, those kinds of things. There's a choke point at this star system, and that star system is the Nusku star system, I think it's pronounced. There are two stars in here, by the way. There's this home world that, and actually that is a world for the Imperium. That is not an outpost. That's an actual world because it's the white box. The one next to it is Dusham. And if I'm mispronouncing these names, that's not surprising. So those are two planetary boxes there. This to me seems like a choke point this way. Procyon over here is another choke point. Everything tends to come to Procyon, and then you get into the Terran area. So I think the Terrans are going to have to really try to hold a forward line. And you also have these other Bernard Star and Gitta that also are kind of part of this four system choke point area. So I think the Terrans are going to want to try to hold this area and maybe try to hold Procyon, maybe Sirius, but again, like I said, you've got to have a tanker, a refueler in there to do that, and they don't have one yet. So I may attempt to move one of these outposts over here and maybe try to hold that system. And of course, for the Imperium, it's going to be just the opposite, right? They're going to want to come down and try to get into here and hurt the Terran outposts and homeworlds, because that's how the Emperor is going to get his glory points. You're only going to get them through taking or losing outposts and worlds. So that's immediately strategically, that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking for the Terrans, it's going to be try to plug up the Imperiums and those points. The Imperium, it's going to be try to break through there. I don't think I see any other thing that's possible there. Let me know if you do. So I think that's just about it. I think I covered just about everything. If I missed something, it's probably fairly minor. When we come back, we will start the first turn, and we will start with the production phase for the Terrans, I believe it is. Let's go back and take a look. Yeah, so the sequence of play, and the way that's going to work is the Terran player will go first and go through all this. Then the Imperial player will go. Basically, it's exactly the same thing that the Terrans do. You'll go through your maintenance and production. They'll move. Then you'll go into combat, space, planetary surface. Then the Empire will get a reaction movement phase, and then it's rinse and repeat. And what else? I think I've hit everything. The player's aid card is here. And like I said, I showed this in the unboxing. We've got our combat tables, planetary combat tables are on one side, and then just some reference information here on the other side, so you can tell what type of ship is what, symbol markers, and your production table in this Imperial intervention table, which we will see at the start of the first turn. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to giving this a try. I think it's an interesting game. Now, this is the first edition. I think there are two other editions after this one. I've never seen those. I have not taken a look at those. So I don't know if there's an opinion on to as far as which edition might be the best. This is what I have. This is what I'm going to use. I'm going to use the rules as printed. There are optional rules, like I said, and we'll hit those real quick for you before we leave. Homeworlds, it's basically saying that, homeworld, you have Sol and you have Gashida. Basically, those are very high population worlds, so it's just going to put a little bit harder to take those worlds. In my opinion, if you have people knocking on the homeworld's door, you're in trouble anyway. So I'm not going to use that, I don't think. Then there's this thing called terraforming. So remember that a war is pretty short, but if you're playing the campaign, you're going to have several turns. So terraforming will let you take one of your outposts at one of these secondary systems and convert it into a world counter or a world. Unfortunately, that's going to take 50 turns, so you're going to have to play the campaign to even use that optional rule. And then there's this other thing called restricted ship construction. It says the Terran player is also subject to restrictions on which ship he may produce. So remember, the Imperials can't produce some of those capital ships until the Emperor says proceed. This restricted ship construction just applies the same sort of thing to the Terrans. And basically what it's saying is you can't build battleships until a dreadnought is destroyed, proving that, you need to build better ships than dreadnoughts. So not going to use that one either. I don't think we need to use that. All right, so that's it. Quick overview of Imperium, Empires in Conflict, Worlds in the Balance, and we will start a playthrough on this one fairly soon. So now I have two playthroughs going on. It's still 1938. I think it's 1938 right now in Triumph and Tragedy. And we have this one, which I'm starting, and I was looking for a year. I think it had a year of like 2135 or something. but it's basically in the future. So that's all we need to know. All right. If you liked this video, please give it a like, subscribe if you haven't, so you'll know when the first turn is released of this game. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you back here next time.